this is gonna be interesting. My first non-crunker video in a while. I mean, you'll see map making footage and stuff for filler, but the actual topic itself isn't gonna be about crunker. I'm gonna talk about something kinda big that I did 2 whole years ago that I somehow never got around to mentioning anywhere. Until now, that is. I have a sort of hidden, semi-useless talent that predates most of what I'm known for, and what it is that I'm incredibly good with PowerPoint. Yeah, PowerPoint, of all things. I used to experiment a lot with PowerPoint as young as 11 years old. Alright, I was still in elementary school when I started tinkering around with PowerPoint 2007, I think, which means I've been a PowerPoint nerd for pretty much half my life. And with my experimentation and even some help from my mom, who uses PowerPoint quite a lot in her job, I became what I guess you could call a power user of PowerPoint. Sorry. And whenever I had to make a PowerPoint in school, I would go all out with my presentations, adding animations, effects, interactability, what have you. Instead of being just bulleted lists with some built-in theme applied, they were more like live sort of performances, I guess, where I would have images upon videos that I'd talk over and things would sync up and be fancy. And at their best, they were sort of just like live versions of some of my YouTube videos. Yeah, in case you can't tell, I was a complete nerd who never had a girlfriend growing up, so I had plenty of time to practice. And this leads me to this big mystery project that I completed a while back, where I made a semi-high effort video game with PowerPoint for an itch.io game jam in December of 2019. And despite just being a demo for time constraints, it won 3rd place out of I don't even remember, 30, 40 contestants? I'm not sure. The game is called HE, and it's a sort of mouse maze game, sort of like that old scary maze game, but without the scary and a little more polish. Where you start off on a checkpoint screen, you click a shape, it takes you to a path, and you move your mouse around that path without falling off, and click on a goal at the end. And that takes you to another path where you rinse and repeat. Throw in some moving platforms and enemies, and even a little boss fight thing at the end, and voila, you got HE. Everything in the game, from the animations, to the buttons, to the interactability, to all the graphics and everything, it's all made solely in PowerPoint. Except for the audio, I made the sound effects using Audacity, and the music is all old music from my high school years, as well as this ambient sort of song I made for college that I later go on to use in Salsa Labs. But aside from that, and a little Easter egg I put in there for the hell of it that involves images I made in Microsoft Paint, everything was made in PowerPoint, without macros or VBA or any kind of scripting. Now, I'm very far from the first one to make a maze game in PowerPoint. In fact, mouse maze games are probably the easiest to make and are among the most common kinds of games that people make in PowerPoint. I guess you could say that maze games are the KR Begahem parkour maps of PowerPoint games. Right, this isn't even my first attempt at a PowerPoint maze game. However, this is easily my most ambitious one, as I took a very different approach to the mouse maze genre of PowerPoint games from what other people have done. Most of the maze games out there tend to be these very long, slow-paced, rage-inducing slogs where you have to go very slowly and carefully, and one mistake sends you right back to the beginning, and it's very annoying. And yeah, I decided for HE to focus more on speed and flow, where the player is encouraged to go a little faster than normal. I have 15 sections per level, and there are only 3 levels because it was a game jam, but yeah, that's a total of 45 sections, and each of these sections take little seconds to complete, right? And there's a checkpoint every 5 sections, so it's pretty generous if you ask me. There are some moments where you have to slow down and tread carefully, but the game moves along much faster, and yeah, in fact I'd argue that it isn't really a maze game, but more of an action game. I don't know what else to call it. I also built the levels themselves much differently than how most people do it, and it's very, very complicated how I did it. And it's gonna take a lot of explaining to do that will make this video way longer than it needs to be, so the TLDR of it is that basically instead of having each section on its own slide, like the way people usually do it, is that they have the initial shape on its own slide, the one that you click on to start the game, and then every single path has its own slide, and every time you click a goal it just advances to the next slide. Instead, I just have everything on one slide per checkpoint, alright? And I did this to consolidate the slide count and also to fix several glitches that arise from just putting all the sections on their own slides. And all in all, this has resulted in the game being much more polished than I'd say most maze games are. And I like to say that it has paid off, alright? But if you were to ask me if I'd ever do something like this again using PowerPoint, my answer would be no. Just no. Even though putting the levels together the way I did, with all of them on one slide, did a lot of good for the game at the end, it was such a pain in the ass. For me and for PowerPoint, alright? Due to how the UI and all the tools in PowerPoint were laid out at the time, it became very complicated and tedious to try and fit all of these shapes and paths and animations all into one slide. And I had to come up with a very specific methodology of getting everything in fully and concisely without taking forever. And again, I'm not going to go into how I did that because it will probably take me hours upon hours to remember, let alone explain, let alone demonstrate. Alright. Not to mention the PowerPoint editor would lag whenever I started to fill up a slide, which really limited how much I could put into these levels. I had to assemble these levels in a separate PowerPoint file with a template of sorts, and copy-paste the template over to the actual game PowerPoint itself to limit how much lag there would be. And even then it was still kind of rough, alright? It was a very arduous task, to say the least. And if anything else, working on a project this way made it very clear to me that PowerPoint is not a game engine, and is not designed at all for making games. And now that I know how to work with actual engines like Unity and Unreal, and even sort of, I guess, the Conquer editor, there is absolutely no reason for me to be using PowerPoint to make games, except for shits and giggles. And yes, I know, if you check it out, you're gonna see at the end that I promised to finish this game up, but I just can't bring myself to have to go through all that again. So what you see here is what you get, alright? 3 levels, 15 sections each, divided into 3 checkpoints with 5 each, with a cool boss fight at the end, a bunch of fancy animations, some old music from my high school years that I'm hoping to finally release in my first album in a few weeks, by the way. It's good, right? It's fine. It's a game, well, I mean, it's more of a demo, but I mean, it's pretty much, I'm calling it finished, so it's a game. I want to point out that it also has a story. Like, I didn't really follow the Game Jam's theme of visual novel all that well, so I decided in a last-ditch effort to throw in this weird dialogue between 2 AI/human personalities in between levels with no skips or anything. Not even anything visual, just text, just sort of shoehorned in with a convoluted story about you being this AI that this machine guy called the Maker made, and this other machine guy called the Teacher is trying to teach by putting you through these trials or something, and at the very end it devolves into this sort of weird-ass nihilistic anti-human just... It's fucking cringe, right? If I were to do anything with this game again, my first step would be to just remove these text cutscenes. Just, yeah. Keep in mind there's a weird story going on, and try not to think too hard about it. But other than that, yeah, the game, it exists, and if you want to play it, I have the game's itch.io page in the description of this video. There you can download it and play. One thing to note is that it's a PowerPoint show file, so you will need to have a semi-recent version of PowerPoint installed on your computer to play it. And if you do, you can just double-click it and PowerPoint runs it for you as a slideshow, and you don't have to do anything else. And I recommend running it in 2013 or later, but I do think it will run fine in 2010. Pretty sure it will not run fine at all in 2007. If you have 365, you should be fine, alright? Just keep in mind that some older versions may give you issues that are intentional on my end, and whatever you do, don't use PowerPoint Online or Google Slides, alright? They don't work at all. And all this info is on the itch page, by the way, so if you need reference, it's there. So, yeah, if you can, I suggest you give it a shot. Ignore the story as much as you can, and tell me what you think in the comments, and just enjoy, have fun, pass the time, rage if you must, I don't know.